So it's pretty spot on, since the idea is also to forecast the likely issues you will experience or you will face, because it will be mainly and pretty often back to management. What I mean this way is that you will face organizational or method issues. You will have to deal with your calendar, your agenda, or the ones which is put on your shoulders. You will have to coordinate with other people and to do your best in this regard. It will be also a question of knowing your area of expertise, your prerogative, and also the amount of work or the ambition you will try to fulfill. And at the end of the day, all these points end up with management issues or stakes. In order to kick off a discussion and the different statements I'm going to do, I would like to refer to a recent event which happened in France. This is, you know, the similar thing as the BAFTA or the Oscar for the movie industry. This is the Pegasus. It's happening now. It's used to happen for 2 years now in France, so it's pretty recent. And there was a quote or statement made by a winner, which was pretty interesting this year. It was for the award for narrative excellence, so it should speak to some of you. And long story short, when the narrative director got the award, he had these interesting statements. The first one was that the storytelling for him in video game was at the intersection of many skills that support each other. So that was the first point, pretty interesting. And the second one was related to the award for narrative excellence per se. He was saying, and you have the quote displayed, that it's an award important to dedicate to the cameras, the sounds, the level design, the graphic artists, the game designers, the programmers, and even producers who do nothing but prevent us from doing what we would like to do for budget reasons. As a producer, it's much appreciated. But anyway, even with a joke of this kind, he mentioned several points pretty interesting for our industry. The first one highlights interdependency, which refers to method. The second one is related to what I mentioned just before, the multidisciplinary, which refers to the need for organization. And then there is this joke about the role and representation of a producer, which refers to, let's say, globally the management, the manager and the producer. So if we combine this with the very nature of the video game, which is just to be on the same page, based on iteration, based on a non-linear medium, with this need for joint effort, unleashing lots of things like communication, a gazillion of crazy ideas, and the need to commit to a set of parameters. I mean, the schedule, a calendar, the budget for cost, and the quality related to expectations. You will quickly get, if it's not already the case, the idea that producing a video game and making a video game is most of the time not about the ideas, even if this is really critical, but about how to make them happen. And in this regard, it refers again to method. So in order to discuss about this, if we combine all the previous statements, we will discuss about what is management. We will have a look to the categories of organization, and we will, of course, speak about the methods. And I am convinced in this regard that on this last point, the method, there is definitely a need for flexibility, which is not necessarily the key statement in our industry. Why doing so? Because I am pretty sure that instead of suffering management, it's better to be a part of it. And to really understand how it works. Because if you are called for help, you can ask for help in return. I mean, it's really all the matter of synergy there. We will go from the management by the manager standpoint. You have some details about the several topics we are going to discuss, about definition, about leadership, about the roles of a manager, about the specificities of a producer. We will envision the management through the organization, and then the method with a focus on the life cycles and some reality checks. So first, if you are ready and steady, let's go with the management by the manager. As you can already see, I will use a specific episode of the Twilight Zone as a starter there, which is To Serve Man. So, spoiler alert, if you have not watched this episode, sorry for you. But it's pretty interesting to use this one because of the ambiguity. In this part, we are not going to talk about To Serve Man, but about To Serve Producer. The bridge with this episode is that in this episode of the Twilight Zone, alien came on Earth in order to help and bring more knowledge and peace to mankind. But on the other side, and that's all the ambiguity of the title, To Serve Man, they are here to harvest mankind in order to cook them and eat them. So you have the two sides of the coin, the two sides of the topic. And actually, the fashion, To Serve Producer, that's a bit the same, because the manager will expect you to do things, and in return, you can expect him to your effort. So it's always both ways, and it's always with a bit of ambiguity you need to consider management. If we go back to the really the very initial definition of management with etymology, of course we are back to Latin roots, with manus, the end, and with agere, the action. And as a matter of fact, and it will not be the first time, management is initially a French term and not an English one. Let's say English people have borrowed this to French people, and in return, a bit later, we have borrowed this back from them. But initially, it's ménager, which means holding the reins of a horse. So if you keep the thinking process moving forward, management refers to two things. One, based on this idea of control and manipulation, this paternalism innovation. And on the other side, you have the idea of taking hands of support, something a bit more smooth, a bit the cliche of maternalism. So you will have always this kind of ambiguity, a bit as the former reference. Now, let's get closer to what is management for us in our industry. We can say that management is the implementation of human and material resources, so far so good, in order to reach some objectives, with the idea of putting technical and human resources together based on the support of a managerial function. If we joke as a producer, we could say that management is about getting others to do what you want, but by putting a seed, by instilling in them the idea that it was what they wanted. So we are back to this idea of, let's say, constructive manipulation. And if we are talking about driving people, if we are talking about being part of this journey, then it means also leadership. And based on this, since all projects will require management, you will be in front of several styles of leadership. I'm going to go through some of them just to give you some references. Of course, the idea today is not to dive too deep in this section, but to, let's say, make you aware, if it's not already the case, about the wide spectrum of possibilities or the wide spectrum of styles you can experience with the managers you will meet. So, of course, the one of the easiest is the autocratic or directive style. In this one, there is, let's say, the power is in one hand. The manager is in control. The developers collaborate. It's pretty straight. There is no room for discussion. What is good is that you go straight to the point when you have an emergency, but it's not really the most, let's say, involving environment. Then you will have also the persuasive approach, which is a bit the same, actually, with a bit more openness for opinions and for recommendations, but not that many, actually. And again, the idea is that you can have a reward sanction system if you want to be a bit more, let's say, guiding the team, but it's definitely not a democratic approach. It's a bit more interesting for involvement, but still it maintains kind of immaturity within the team. You have the delegative type, which is based on the transfer of decision power. You need a team which is pretty well established with a good know-how and able to withstand the pressure. Good thing, yeah, a bit more room for initiative, but you need a specific environment if you want to make this happen. Then you have also the participative or democratic on the other extreme. In this one, of course, people are highlighted, are really in front of the issues. So it's really more about the interpersonal management and the group dynamics, which is pretty good, and a bit less effective in case you need to go faster in case of issues, because you have a bit of slowness in the decision-making process. So as a recap, related to where you put the manager in terms of influence and where you put the focus in terms of missions versus people, you can distribute these models this way. But again, you will have the notes. I invite you to have a look a bit later. You can also find lots of these models on the internet. It's something which was pretty pushed and worked the last years, actually. You have also different variation. There are still always on two main parameters with some extremes, and a combination of these parameters giving you the idea of the management style. So we have discussed about the management. We have discussed about the leadership. What about the manager? By extension and related to some author like Mintzberg, it was a Canadian academic in management sciences. The manager is then a person with authority and means who work for an organization in order to coordinate action and to make sure that change and information will happen. It highlights three main axes. The first one is that the manager has to work in an interpersonal dimension. He has also to work on communication. And then, of course, he has to deal with the decision-making process. And we have considered just before that it was not only about him making the decision. He could be also the arbiter or delegate this decision-making process. But there is a functional management influence in process in a project most of the time. If I go even closer to the video game industry and the role of a producer, then I can consider that a producer is necessarily a manager. But, and we will see this in the second part with the organization, a manager is not necessarily a producer. If I recall or I remind the quote from the narrative director in the beginning of the presentation, he was, or he said that the producer could be thanked even when they do nothing but prevent us from doing what we want to do for budget reasons. So is he right in this regard? Yes, innovation. The producer has to deal with human and material resources. It's part of his prerogatives. But no, of course, it's a bit easy to imagine that the role of a producer is just to deal with budget. He's not the accountant of a project, not only at least. But it's potentially okay, because one of the forms of intervention of a producer may consist in setting limits, as well as encouraging the movement of lines. And for reasons of cost, yes, that's a possibility, but it cannot be only this. Since we are talking about preconceived ideas, you will have also sometimes the idea that a producer, this is pointless. You don't need a producer to make a game. And yes, actually, it's pretty spot on. If you consider that you don't need a programmer, an artist, a sound designer to make a game. In other words, when you highlight the expertise, and if the expertise is delivered, at the end of the day, you don't care about the person who delivers. You do care about the expertise. So if somebody else than a producer performs a production role within the team, it's all good. If an artist is a better coder than your programmer, yeah, all good. What I mean is that the function is on top of the person. So in this regard, yeah, you can disregard the producer of this or that. But at the end of the day, if you want to perform a good work, then you will hire a professional who can do this full time. So yes, a producer could be considered as useless as anybody else, but you cannot disregard the need for a production role. Then you have a third interesting idea related to the fact that a producer would only take care about the meetings and the Excels. Again, same. Yes, no, potentially. You will have, for instance, project coordinator with the title of producer, which is actually a misuse. And these people will have to take care about the logistic coordination of the production effort. But if you call this a producer, then it's a lack of understanding of the function, organization and needs of the project, once again. Of course, it can be related to the size of the team, related to the project, related to the studio. It can be one of the missions of a producer to take care of this, meeting, Excel, documentation, etc. But you cannot reduce a producer to this. A short word on the shade and the distinction between producer and project manager. Most of the time in the teams you are going to work with, there will be a producer who will be as well a project manager, because it's always, or most of the time, a combined role. Not an easy one to have both hats, but it happens this way. It's only in the very big structure then you will have dedicated project manager and producer. Otherwise, the producer is often doing both. If we want to make just a distinction between these two roles that can be supported by one person, we can say, for instance, that the producer is the side dedicated to scope and feature, which is focused on the team dynamics and some of the client relationship. By client, I mean as well the internal as the external client, the CEO, the publisher, etc. In this regard, the producer is the guardian of the project vision. Sentence, if we want to make it short. On the other side, but complementary, the project manager is more of a specialist of the cost and schedule. He is focused on the breakdown of missions, the tasks, the organization, the formalization, and the monitoring, thanks to specific indicators. In this regard, he is more the guardian of the good progress of the project, and he is more fond, if I can say, of metrics. So now we have a pretty good global picture about management by manager standpoint. We need to combine this with what is management by the organization. And for this, I will stick to specific organization kind. Before going with the method into the details of the kind of studios in the video game industry, we can have a look to the kind of organization in which you will most likely work, and you will see why. The formalization I'm going to share is based on the fact that on the one hand, you will have the functional organization, and we are going to define them. And on the other hand, we will have the projectized organization, which is a total different kind. In between, you have lots of variety and variation we are going to go through. At some point, you will end up working in one of these organizations. So it's, in my opinion, pretty interesting that you can spot roughly the kind of organization in which you will work, because it can also have an impact and an influence in the way you will interact with the other developers, with the manager, or other stakeholders within the project or outside of the project, actually. So let's start with the functional organization. It's a specific kind of organization in which each employee has one clearly superior or manager. It's usually more related to specialties or functional departments managed by a dedicated functional manager. You can see already that in this organization, as I have mentioned, or as a reference to what I said previously, there is no producer. There is a need for production support. There is a project coordination. But in this organization, this is supported by the functional managers. You will see as well in the video game industry that some studios bypassed were pretty well known or proud to mention that they didn't need a producer or they didn't need project managers. But each time when you have a closer look, it's because this is compensated by the autonomy of their teammates, or by the experience, or by the fact that the production role is supported by specific people. In this one, this is the organization taking the lead on the production and on the coordination, thanks to functional manager. These functional managers are special champions, tech lead, art director, level design director, and so forth and so on. Then, each step we are going to get closer to the projectized organization. You have the weak matrix organization. In this one, we are talking about a functional organization. It's roughly the same visual. And a first coordinator, a first, let's say, member of the production family pops. It can be a project manager, assistant, or coordinator, just to make sure there is a good communication flow or there is a good logistic coordination. There is no real decision making on the production side, just a presence to help and to ease the workflow. So we are roughly close to a functional organization, but with a spice of production. The balanced matrix organization is the halfway, as its title points it. It's between the functional and the projectized organization. And in this kind of organization, in this category, we acknowledge and we are okay to use and to hire a producer or project manager. There is a need for it. Still, we are not talking about a strong influence or a strong decision-making process. It's more like kind sometimes of competition between the functional managers and the producers. There is some kind of war of influence or a sane competition, if you want. But there is pretty often a need for arbitration by the CEO, for instance. But the project manager starts to exist in the organizational chart. A step further, we have a strong matrix organization in which the producer has more, let's say, influence or more power. All depends what you put behind this word. But definitely the producer has the means to make decisions. And it starts to have a team dedicated to a project with shared resources or dedicated resources. And then you have the projectized organization. In this one, we are talking now about a staff which is even physically grouped in a project team. Resources are there for the project, managed by a producer or a project manager, and the previous functional managers are under the authority of a producer. It could be the same people we mentioned previously, art director, tech lead, game design lead, etc. But they work under the authority of a producer. So with these 5 categories, you have a pretty good, let's say, idea of the different organizations you will most likely experience. There is still one category which is a bit special, which is composite organization. In this one, we are talking about, of course, combination, adaptation, creation of different styles of organization within the same organizational entity. It can be the case, for instance, I have put 2 examples. When you have a functional organization which is set in a projectized global organization. It can be for the sake of some R&D goals or to have a specific purpose on a given time. But you have also the reverse. You can have a strong matrix organization, for instance, that will set no, that's the reverse. Sorry. You can have a functional organization that will set a small projectized organization in order to fulfill a specific order or a specific client expectation. So there is always a way to combine and to do experimentations at some expenses, of course, because we are talking about interpersonal management, we are talking about processes, we are talking about communication management. So it always comes with a price to pay. But yeah, you can have a combination of these categories. So as a recap, quickly, on the one hand, you have functional organizations with barely no actually or little production presence, and on the other extreme, the projectized with the authority of the producer in action. And in between, you have all the shades of possibilities with the weak matrix, the balance matrix, and the strong matrix. And you can see that the all dedicated or shared the resources will be, who deals with the budget, and how important is the presence of the producer will match one of the other categories. So, time for method. We have discussed about the management by the manager's eyes. We have just considered how to identify the categories of organization in the studio you will work. Now we need to discuss about the method and how it impacts and it is impacted by management. And for this, we have to discuss about the life cycles of the video game projects, which are a bit specific. But globally, what we could say about life cycles. First, we have the predictive life cycle, which is related to a linear approach about project management. As it's titled predictive, we are talking about something which is fully plan-driven. Each phase focuses on a specific goal with adapted processes. The work done in one phase is usually different from the work done in the previous and the next one. Each phase must unlock the conditions for the next phase. That's generally the life cycle you go for with the waterfall approach, as you have in the visual, when you know pretty well what to do and when the team knows what has to happen. So that's one thing. Then you have the iterative and incremental life cycle, which is also called or can be called the Y life cycle. It's more or less the most emblematic you'll find in the video game industry, even though the previous one and the one to come are also good. In this one, we will put a specific light on method like waterfall, like the previous one, Agile Method, and also a combination of best practices in project management. In this one, after a core intense iteration, you have a chain of iterations to improve progressively the project and the product. You can gain in features, in functionalities. Each phase has similar processes, more or less, and concludes with one or more deliverables, allowing to feedback and unleashing improvements. This is generally the one you will pick, or which is here per se by itself, when the product is subject to change, when there is a need for partial delivery or visibility with an ongoing or continuous risk management. And then you have the adaptive life cycle, which is really more related to agile approach. And then for this one, if for the first we had the waterfall, if for the second we have a combination of methods, for this one, this is really about the agile method. Because this is change driven, you have to be able to adapt, to adjust, to change drastically, maybe, your backlog. And in a way, you have the same structure at like the end or the middle and the end of the Y life cycle. That is to say, you will have iterations, but these ones will be faster with fixed costs. The scope will be always available, but can evolve significantly between these iterations, and you need to deliver each time something which allows to evaluate and consists in a validation of the next step. This is generally preferred when your development environment is most likely to change quickly, or if the requirements and the scope are not really well known, actually. So this is really the sprint approach and the Scrum approach. I would like now to make a focus, especially on the Scrum, based on the Agile, and then on the project management body of knowledge of best practices. And you will see why. About the Scrum, just to make sure you have the right picture in mind, because Scrum is pretty famous or infamous in our industry, which refers to this need for flexibility I mentioned earlier. So Scrum appeared in the 80s in order to bring innovation in front of complex projects. It puts a high focus on the group dynamics, and in this regard is really good to build in, to create joint effort. You have lots of values like courage, focus, commitment, respect, openness. You have also the Agile Manifesto with 4 strong principles. And this emphasizes on the product, the need to deliver a product. But it's way less flexible than it seems. That's the reason why I am always conservative with always telling to everybody that we are working with the Scrum, because you will see nobody really works with Scrum as a matter of fact, or at least not by the book. Related to the Agile life cycle we were just discussing, you can find back the approach. You have a backlog, you have some processes, but they have really to be supported by the people, and you have really short iterations to get visibility and to provide visibility related to your product. You have usually a daily check with daily stand-up meeting. You have at the beginning of a sprint, which is a unit of time in which you want to achieve specific goals. You have a step and a time for estimation with the poker planning. At the end of this sprint time, you will have a review and a retrospective, a way to evaluate how you performed and what is to be changed. You will have specific roles within the team, a product owner to be the guardian of the vision of the product. You will have the Scrum Master, which is more of the method side, and you will have the developers. And you can see, even if we are not talking about positions, but about roles, but there is already a similarities with this breakdown between producer and project manager, with the product owner and the Scrum Master. So it means as well at the end that the team has to embrace this fight and to be part of the management as well. You have, of course, the product backlog, which is somehow the scope statement, the vision of what you want to achieve, and the sprint backlog, which is the piece of the product backlog you want to nail down during a sprint. Of course, the idea is that at the end of each sprint, you have an opportunity to iterate on the product backlog. And by the book, it means that you could start with one kind of a project and end up with a total different one, which is actually hardly the case in our industry. And that's the reason why there is a strong limitation saying that we are working with Scrum, because Scrum in the very beginning was not thought for video game. It's a pretty good method, but it's not thought for our industry. We are using it with, let's say, special adjustments, even if we are not saying we are doing some adjustments. That's kind of open secret. But still, what you will have with Scrum is the opportunity to build a team and to build a long-term endeavor thanks to short-term effort. On a different aspect, more related to project management in general, best practices, and the why life cycle, you have the project management body of knowledge, which is from the PMI, the Project Management Institute, and which is actually a Bible of know-how and best practices gathered by project managers from really different horizons and different fields. It appeared in the 70s with the idea to have a really strong formalization of good practices. But whatever the product was, it means that at the end of the day, with the PMBOK, you could build a car, or you could make a video game, or you could build a house. It's for projects, whatever the project is. And what is interesting is that it supports some interesting values like formalization, consensus, interdependency. It integrates now for 5 to 6 years the agile considerations, and it aims to execute the backlog, the ambition, and to monitor the progression through specific processes and indicators. These ones, really in short, because it's a pretty complex subject matter, is related to how you can break down the different states of your project with these 5 process groups. You have the initiating, the planning, the executing, the need for monitoring and controlling, and the closing. Pretty straight. Covering 10 knowledge areas. All these areas, more or less, you will find them back in your development environment. We are talking about integration, all the parameters, which are the roots of your project. We are talking about the scope, what you want to achieve, the contents. We are talking about the time, the calendar, about the cost, the budget, about the quality, quality control and quality assurance. We are talking about hiring people, releasing staff, dealing with daily issues in this regard. We are talking about managing communication, about managing risk, about dealing with outsourcers, about dealing with people within the company, outside of the company. And of course, it will lead us with this method, which is not really a method per se, since it's a gathering of best practices, to a set of processes, and you have to pick your fight. You, most of the time, the project manager or the producer. But it's pretty interesting that you are aware of this, because at some point you will be asked for recommendation, for assessment, or for executing something, and it's good to know where you have to act and for which purpose. So these processes, it's about the idea of a project, the project charter, it's about the scope in the very beginning, even sometimes before the contract is done. We are talking about the milestone list, that is to say, what you will have to deliver on specific time frame, but also the communication management plan, the risk analysis, and so forth and so on. Once this is set, the life cycle, the method, you need also to have a look to the studio. Previously, we had a discussion, we had a presentation about the categories of organization. But this can be also completed by the culture of a studio and the type of studio. And this is closely related to the kind of project you will be involved in. Globally, we can consider 3 kinds of studios. The first one, the indie studio, pretty small, not that much money in general. The scope is pretty open for huge creativity, for iteration, for velocity, within the boundaries of the money. That's a bit of a limitation. In this one, the size of the team is perfect to use Scrum. And because the iteration is pretty open, it's also a good match for Agile approach. We can question what is the education, what is the formation in terms of method, but that's a bit the idea of Indie Studio. Then you will have AA, or so-called AA studios. AA projects means 2 to 5 millions, sometimes a bit more, 1 to 3 years, teams between 20 to 50 people, roughly. But a limited scope with little room for iteration. You will have a bit of iteration in the beginning to find the right idea or to sell the right idea, and then you need to make it happen. The team size is still okay, not really by the book, but if you split the team in dedicated units, feature teams or specialized teams, then it will do the trick. But then you need to have Scrum Masters and product owners, so you need to adapt the method to the size of your team. Still, we are talking about Scrum, but we can still question if everybody in this kind of studio is used to Scrum. And then you have the AAA and even the 4A studio, which are related to gigantic teams and to other ambitious projects. The team size is no more compatible with Scrum, definitely. And since you have lots of money, at least on paper, the major risk is not to stick to your scope, but to be some kind of never-ending loop of creativity. And again, you can really question if the people are used to a specific method. As a recap, you have different set of constraints related to different kinds of studios. So it's already something which points the need for flexibility, because you cannot simply paste the method, which is the miraculous one, to video game industry. We can see already that there is a limitation to it if we do this breakdown. And we can even point and question if everybody is equal in terms of methodology. If you cross this with the different kinds of organization we discussed before, and with the leadership style, and with the role of the manager, and so forth, and so on, you will consider that you have to be really picky and cautious with the reality of our industry. Because if you are told, like I was, or as I was told so many times, that Scrum is the best, or Prince2 is the best, or this is the best, it's pretty tricky, because it's about aiming to use a method which is not systematically relevant, as we have just noticed, in a context which has to be evaluated, and sometimes which is not the right one for the method, with the risk of a lack of expertise leading to bad habits and misfunctions or issues, with still the initial will or desire to reassure everybody. What I mean this way is that if I insist on all these parameters about management and all the inputs which feed management and with which we'll have to deal, it's because there is always a need for alternative ways and workarounds. So I have always these 3 tips I had the opportunity to share in a previous presentation, and I'm going to recap. The first one is to accept Even I'm not even talking for managers. I'm talking even for developers, actually, to be aware of your environment, the kind of organization, the kind of leadership, the team size, the ambition of a project. So to be aware of this and to accept that, because there is no need to stick to one method or to Scrum, as it was said the last 10 years. Because before it was not Scrum, it was waterfall. And in 10 years, it would be something else. So there is no need to stick to Scrum by the book at any cost. It's better to identify the set of constraints, the limitations, the strength as well, and to claim the right adjustments. In this regard, even if you're a developer, you can contribute to this with recommendations, with advices, with clues about things you have spotted. Once accepted, it's about adapting. All methods can have good things. There is no reason to throw everything away. So, for instance, we can keep an eye on the main agile benefits. And this way, we can be picky on the fights. Yeah, in the Agile approach, the Agile Manifesto is great. The toolbox is great. Team dynamics is awesome. But yeah, pure iteration, it's not a good match. The last ones who did this, it was Blizzard. And even then, they stopped because not everybody can afford to do so. Or with some side effects, actually. Then combination is the key. You need a complementary approach or several once an agile routine is set or once a specific method routine is set. And you can combine. What I like to do is to combine actually all the three, waterfall, PMBOK, and Scrum. More, we know the needs, adaptation, empirism, and responsiveness. We are aware about the inputs, the manager type, the leadership style, the kinds of organization, the company culture, the ambition of a studio with the kind of project. And we know the methods which are available, the linear ones with waterfall, the agile ones. Of course, there are way many more than these ones, but Scrum, XP, Kanban, Six Sigma. You have also the meta method with the best practices for the PMBOK, but you have also a strong methodology with the Prince2. You have also the critical path. So we have enough, actually. And as a recap, my philosophy in this regard is to take the benefits of Scrum, to combine them with the benefits of the PMBOK, so to combine the short-term visibility with the long-term monitoring, supporting building the team, and to make it real thanks to the strength of the waterfall rigidity. And it's not about doing Scrum by the book, but by the tools. It's about staying flexible, but within a specific rigor. So, as a conclusion, I would like to share a second morale to this presentation. And I will refer to Maslow. Maybe you know him. He was an American psychologist. Maybe you know the pyramid of Maslow with the needs, the hierarchy of needs. He had also this interesting sentence about the fact that if the only tool you have is a hammer, you will have tendency to treat everything as if it were a nail. And that's the reason why today I wanted to insist again on the need to be aware of your working environment, of the kind of interpersonal management, of the area of expertise, and all these expertise are going to be combined together. The main idea is to be cautious in front of a miracle method. to have empathy with providential man. There is no one guy saving a company. There is no one guy making a change like this. And a video game is not performed and produced by one guy. Maybe back in the days in the 80s, and even then, I think, are really small games. And even more important, there is a need for reflexivity, that is to say, self-awareness in relation to your professional posture. What you want to fight for, when you can trigger the fight, with who, based on which kind of communication, who you will target to get what you want, and who is asking you what, for which purpose. So I hope with all this combination of parameters and this triple section approach with the management, with the organization, and with the method, you will have, let's say, more possibilities to read this grid in the industry. The last thing is to thank you for your attention and to wish you a good survival in our industry. Thanks. Beyond all the issues we had to deal with, and all the issues you will have to deal with, because that's the fate of a video game project. One of them was interesting, and this is this one we are going to deal with, and it's related somehow to art, actually, art considerations within production decisions. So the game, in short, survival game. So at Limbic Entertainment, online survival game, PvP, PvE, players versus players, or players versus enemies / environment, based on a seasonal pace. Initially thought for a PC release with an option for consoles. The other parameters are not really relevant there. The tech was Unreal Engine 4. So yeah, nothing really crazy there. I am talking about the time frame which is 3 to 4 years old in terms of production effort. You have to remember or to consider that at this time it was the big boom of the survival thing. 2 or 3 years before, that is to say, 7 years, 8 years ago, some specific games like Daisy, like H1Z1, like Rust, popped in our environment, on the market, and it was kind of a big revolution because these games were pretty raw or rough in a way, but they were really fresh because they had no compromising approach in terms of game design. They were really cheap in terms of user interface, and all these defaults were also appreciated because it brought the feeling of something really new and pure and extremely challenging. So this game was a bit in the continuity and was at the end somehow stuck between this boom of the genre and the arrival of Fortnite and PUBG, etc., to give you a bit the time frame. But at this moment, it was still something we could achieve in terms of commercial success. In terms of game pillars, it was pretty straight. You were on Mars, you had to survive. In order to do so, to scavenge. Then, thanks to scavenging, you could craft to improve your environment and have a longer survival expectation or time. Of course, it was online with multiplayer parameter, so you could consider to get ally or to betray them related to your style of play. And it was bound to a season, that is to say, you had a season to survive or to make your way to the next one. The story in this regard evolved pretty often, but it was still the same mechanism, which is pretty tailored for this kind of game, since you can wipe the servers and restart your experience. So the season and the seasonal pace was a pretty good fit in this regard. In terms of closer focus on the game loop, as I have said, the main idea was to survive Mars, and this way to experience your way to play actually, and to interact with others. Again, the loop, I'm just going to repeat with a bit more details, was to survive. The idea was to have a pretty challenging environment and to have to fight to find resources and to fight against the environmental threats and other players. This was supposed to unlock new possibilities to get stuff through mining, through discoveries, through achievements. If you had if you were able to create a team with other players, and this new possibilities was supposed to unlock more crafting in terms of equipment, armor, weapons, base building, and so forth and so on, in order to increase the survival. In terms of art, vision, and environment, we were in a rundown environment, a bit rusty, with possibility to go to the north of Mars with an ice area, and with the usual sandstorm. So we had all the, let's say, the Mars boxes to check in this regard, and it worked pretty well. We wanted something which was really wide in terms of experience, even if gradually we opened, let's say, the challenge to a wider audience, instead of sticking to something really hardcore as we wanted in the beginning. Because the risk was to be compared to the new games. We were heavily based on shooting, and it was not our kind of approach. We had a fighting part, of course, but as I have highlighted with the pillars, we had different features to rely on in order to provide, let's say, a wide experience in terms of fun, because you could have pretty hard fun with fighting. You could have social fun. You had also lots of inventory management and lots of easy fun in terms of achievement. So it was pretty open in this regard. So conception was rebooted with a new World Bible, with a new Art Bible, with a new setting. So after a first conception and pre-production, now we were back somehow to conception and again pre-production with this new setting. And as I have mentioned, there was a need for new things. We had a new, let's say, stakeholder, a new partner in the journey with us. So we had a new possibility to release. We were still in pre-prod, with a bit still to do in terms of conception, but it was pretty well advanced. Mars was trendy. It's still the case, but at the moment it was really pretty trendy. There was lots of inspiration from it. There was the Mad Max movie with this desert. There was The Martian by Ridley Scott. Lots of things actually about Mars. There was lots of considerations about Mars, which are confirmed today, and so forth and so on. We sticked, we were still sticking to our genre, PvE, PvP with exploration and fights. And in terms of pure production, it was the same team from day one, or roughly. If I keep the PvE, PvP in mind, it's because it's the core of the issue we faced. In terms of character design for the PvE part, we had different enemies, which are pretty typical for this kind of game, actually. We had a melee one, we have a ranged, and then we had kind of humanoid one, then the elite, and then the boss. So you have really different style of fighting approach with gain of complexity and challenge along the way. And so far so good, but what happened is during this reboot, when we were in the pre-production, and I think we had already produced one prototype with the humanoid kind, the one in the middle, which was pretty emblematic for us to have a, let's say, convincing vertical slice. When we were in this effort, there was a game, little game, which was released. It was Prey from Arkane Studio in France, but for Bethesda, small publisher. So the thing was that it was pretty challenging for us because there was, it's not really, I played the game, but I cannot really remember. It's not really related to Mars, if I'm not mistaken, but this is sci-fi. Okay, well, we can deal with this. But the enemy was a bit the question mark for us, beyond the fact it was super high standard in terms of production, AAA, and we were AA. The enemies you will see quickly put the team and the publisher, our publisher, in kind of a difficulty to make up our mind. As you can see, there were some similarities in terms of design. Even if it's not exactly the same, it was roughly the same, and also in terms of gameplay mechanics. So, and we had this for actually several mobs, several enemies. Again, it was roughly the same parameters and the same mechanics. The same for the light. So the point is, it was not really a core feature in terms of gameplay, since the games were different. We were an online multiplayer survival game, and Prey was a single player, I guess, adventure. Both sci-fi, same enemies. So in a way, we were not touching, the risk was not affecting or impacting the core game loop, but still one of the USP. That is to say, we had this innovative ion form on Mars, or defensive system. There was a story bound to it. And we had this difficulty. On the one hand, we had our design, and you can see on top what we integrated into our prototype. And still, we had some features to implement. We were at the very beginning with the pre-production. And we had all the other features, all the tweaking, all the polishing. And in front of us, we had Prey with, pretty high standards in all fields, animations, shaders, FX, sounds, actually everything. And with a release before us. So yeah, it was pretty headache. So the question was, if I would be your producer and I would come to you, so let's assume you are artist and you are part of a team since the beginning. What you would recommend to do related to this situation? Because this is something we had to discuss a lot within the team. So I don't know if some of you have some ideas to share. You can, and we will discuss now or later. Otherwise, I can go on. Just tell me what you prefer. But if you have an epiphany or an inspiration, feel free to share. Don't be shy. So, what would you recommend to do? You are in the middle of a pre-production, and you have one of the USP, the unique selling points, which is impacted by a competitor, which is not really of the same genre. What would you recommend to your producer? What would be your call or your advice? Aha, okay. So I'm going to go on, and we will discuss after. So, of course, which is funny in this example. Funny? No, it's funny. At the moment, it was not. What is interesting in this example is that typically when you build a risk analysis, you have a line, you have an entry for this, you have an input. This is typically the risk with a pretty low probability, but if it happens with a pretty high gravity, so the criticality is pretty low because of the probability. That is to say, it's something that could happen, but you keep the fingers crossed that it will not happen. But sometimes it happens. And once it happens, since it's the kind of risk you cannot really prevent to happen, it was out of the scope. Even if you track and you monitor the trends, what you can do? I mean, you have just to withstand the blow. So we had, of course, different options or scenarios. We had a clue, we had an idea about what could have happened because of the partners we had for the assets, but we never really investigated in this direction. But for sure, there is a high probability that the concept arts we got for our enemies, which was outsourced, could have been shared or not. Question mark. We will never know, and that was not the point. It could have been. It was not the idea. So, of course, the first option was, okay, we redesign the enemy. We need to adjust the story. We need to adjust the setting. We need to assess how it impacts everything, what we can save from the gameplay mechanics. Of course, globally, let's say the framework, the main principles will stay the same. There will be melee, range, the humanoid kind, the big one, and maybe even the bigger one. But the style, the approach, and all the things related had to change. So that was the first option. And then we had three options. The first one it was then, okay, we change our approach. But all the three other scenarios were more based on the fact we accept the risk. We don't try to dodge. We accept the risk and we will mitigate. The first way to mitigate was, okay, it's a pure acceptance. We are going to move forward as if nothing happened. We will do our enemy. We will stick to our design. Same calendar, same plan, same cost. Okay, and we will take the hit that it's a ship prey enemy. That was the first, or at least the second scenario there. Third scenario, we try to disguise the misery and to evolve, but it will be noticed, question mark. Will it be good, question mark. Additional cost, question mark, but it was an option. And then there was a scenario, the last one, in which it was no more a risk, but an opportunity. That is to say, okay, but since Prey did this, maybe we stick to our AA approach, but we unbalance everything and we put lots of emphasis on the enemy. And suddenly, for this part of the project, we go AAA. It's a pretty bold commitment, and it could still have been perceived as a copycat of the Prey enemies, but it was an option. Related to the key parameters, we decided to go for the redesign and to dodge and mitigate this wave impact, because that was one option we really could afford to go for. Why? Because we were rebooting, so there was still room for changes, luckily. If it would have been a bit later in the production process, it would have been a different subject matter and a different balance of the decision, of course. But at this very moment, but for one and me, which was not totally produced, I think it was a pill we could swallow. We were still AA based, with the limitation I mentioned in the previous presentation. So little room for iteration and little room for big expenditures. So it would have been pretty challenging to convince the publisher to, let's say, add more money for this related to that. So we stick to this AA philosophy. And we save this way, or we confirm, or we secured the outsourcing budget still. But we did consider that it was still an artistic direction opportunity, and we could add value still. And because of this, we went for the redesign. It's a good reminder on two things. The first one is that the responsiveness, being really responsive, is not a matter of fighting at any cost, but picking the right fight. Yeah, you need to go fast, but you don't need to rush into any directions. And the second thing is that the risk management in the same philosophy is not about dodging risks, but picking the right ones. You have seen that in all scenarios I mentioned before, there was always pros and cons, always. And most of the time, the life of the project will be made out of this kind of situations. You don't try to dodge, or rarely, you try to be proactive or responsive related to events. And these events could be threats or opportunities. It depends at the end of the day how you will mitigate or use them to gain more momentum. What came out of this? I'm going to share some sketches and some visuals. We did produce enemies. It did work. The game was released. It's called Memories of Mars. It was a mixed success. Pretty okay with the players, not on a commercial level, for plenty of reasons, but not related actually to the enemies, which is a bit the good conclusion for this case. So other examples, the different enemies. So you see, we gave up with all the life form and tentacles, etc., and we switched to the insectoid robotic approach. And the thing is that we even used this in order to rethink all the backstory. I will not go into details, but it was really a changer which was more an opportunity, and not something we suffered from, at least at the end. In the beginning, it was kind of a blow because we were just restarting and we were just gaining more, let's say, speed, and we had to stop to rethink and to have a new strategy. So yeah, again, etc., etc. And that was all actually for this case today. I hope you have enjoyed practical details from an existing project. Thanks.
Thank you so much. It's Christina, Rena's colleague. He had to step out, so I'm going to wrap this up.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I can hear you pretty far.
Great. So we have time for questions. Is that fine?
Yeah, of course.
If you guys have any questions, now's the time. Or maybe some notes, good wishes, nothing. Okay.
Hoćeš ti da pitaš, umjesto, to samo pitam kako je prošla igra na kraju, koliko dobro je rezonovalo s igračima.
So how did the game perform in the end? Did it resonate with the fan base?
The game worked at release, you mean?
Sorry?
The question is, if the game worked, performed well when it was released. That's the question.
Was it well received by the players?
It was mixed. It was so-so, mainly because of the context of the release. There was an ambition to go on the Chinese market, and it was, I think, pretty tricky. And as I have mentioned, between the beginning of the project and the end of the project, we have been hit by really strong releases like Fortnite, like PUBG. And this competition, even if we were not in the same genre, was really covering us, I mean, and we were not visible enough. So the game is still available on Steam. It has mixed positive review, but it should have got better reviews actually.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Možda dobro samo, da li misli da bi, da li on misli da se nije desio Prey i da nisu morali da rade ovaj redizajn, da bi se nešto promenilo u tome kako su igrači prihvatili igru i u njenom uspehu?
If you didn't have to redesign the game, do you think the response would be different?
Not really, because the problem we experienced at release was not related to the contents. The contents and the overall experience was pretty well received, and I think it could have worked with the initial design we had in mind. I did think that the main problem we had with the game was related to the let's say the market we targeted and the communication. Maybe we should have done things a bit more, you know, in a wide way, the way it was done for Daisy or for Rust, with more proximity, being closer to the audience, to the players, and not having something a bit more formal like a traditional game, because it was mainly based on communities. So and there were other parameters that could explain it didn't work super well, but the design per se and the overall experience is still pretty well received in the comments on Steam.
Yeah, thank you so much. So that's a great point, yeah, about the release date and actually knowing in advance if similar or, you know, semi-similar games are going to be released around the same time.
Yeah.
That was actually a huge mistake made by the publishers that helped publish one of the method games. That's one of the reasons why it flopped so much, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Your expertise is valued as always. Maybe Rada wants to say a few words.
Oh no, thanks for the opportunity. Actually, you can also contact me on LinkedIn if you have any additional questions, of course.
That's great.
Cool. Yeah, we are going to share the presentation and your contacts, and thanks for sharing your time. And of course, we'll be in touch. We'll let you know how the groups are going, and maybe from September we are in touch again, just to let you know how the project.
Oh yeah, my pleasure, of course.
Thanks a lot, Stephan. You have a nice evening and a nice weekend.
Thanks for your time. Bye and good luck.
Thank you.